Out on the sun-scorched plains of 1880s Arizona, a lone Apache warrior had traded his lance for a plow. His name was Ethan, and for 20 years his only companions were ghosts. He had built a life of solitude, a fortress of silence. But the frontier is relentless. One blistering afternoon, the dust on the horizon wasn't a storm, it was fate. A broken-down wagon carrying 5 desperate widows, their lives shattered by a tragedy they couldn't even begin to understand. They had nothing left but a single, impossible plea for shelter. This is the story of how that plea would either become their salvation or ignite the very flames of the past Ethan had fought so hard to escape. The silence of the Cinder Ranch was a living thing. For 20 years, it had been the only companion of the man the world knew as Nate. But his real name was Ethan. He had once been a warrior, one of Geronimo's best. He had seen the world burn, felt the fire of battle, and the cold, hard despair of surrender. He had lost his wife, Apache, and his young son, Doda. Not to a soldier's bullet, but to the coughing sickness on the reservation. When the government gave him this patch of land, a dry, unforgiving tract nobody else wanted, he accepted it not as a gift, but as a cage. He built his adobe house with his own hands, dug a well until he hit water, and turned his back on the world. He was a ghost living on borrowed time. His days were a ritual. Tend the cattle, work the corn, check the fences. His hands, which once held a rifle with deadly purpose, were now calloused from a hoe. He spoke only to his horse, a Mustang named Ghost, and only in his native tongue. Then one Tuesday, the silence broke. He was on his porch sharpening a knife when he saw it. A pillar of dust, rising slow and agonizing from the east. It was the plume of something heavy, something dying. He watched, his dark eyes unblinking, as the shape slowly resolved itself. A single prairie schooner, its canvas torn, pulled by 2 skeletal oxen. He felt a familiar tightening in his gut. Trouble. Trouble always came covered in dust. He laid the knife down, went inside, and came back out with his 1873 Winchester. The weight of it in his hands was a comfort, a link to a past where threats were simpler. The wagon creaked to a halt 100 yards from his fence, one of its wheels shattered. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the canvas flap was pushed aside, and a woman climbed down. Tall, with fiery red hair, her face smudged with dirt, but her posture unbent. She was followed by 4 others. They huddled together like quail, sensing a hawk. One of them, a stout woman with a worried face, held a rifle, but she held it awkwardly, like it was a snake that might bite her. The red-haired woman, clearly their leader, started walking towards his house. Alone. She stopped at the fence. "Hello, the house," she called out, her voice raspy. Ethan remained on the porch, Winchester across his chest. He said nothing. Silence was his shield. "My name is Sarah O'Malley," she continued. "Our wagon, it's broken. We've been traveling from Clifton. Our husbands, they all died in the copper mine collapse 3 weeks ago." Her voice cracked, but she held it together. "We have a boy with us. He's sick. We've been without water since yesterday morning. We're begging you, for a little water, for shelter." He studied her. He saw no deceit, only a bone-deep desperation that echoed in his own soul. Still, he did not move. Trust was a currency he no longer possessed. From the wagon, the woman with the rifle shouted, her voice laced with fear. "Sarah, come back! You don't know who that is!" Sarah's eyes remained locked on Ethan. "Please," she whispered, "we have nowhere else to go." Ethan's gaze drifted to the wagon. He saw the pale face of a child peering out. A boy, no more than 7, the same age Dada had been. A memory, sharp as glass, pierced his armor. His wife's dying whisper, Promise me you will live. Find the sun again." He had lived, but he had only seen the glare off the baked earth. He let out a slow breath. He lowered the Winchester. With movements that seemed to ache, he walked to the gate. He didn't open it. He just looked at Sarah O'Malley. "One night," he said, his voice a low rumble, rough from disuse. "Water and a roof. Then you go." Relief washed over Sarah's face so completely, she looked like she might collapse. "Thank you," she breathed. "God bless you." Ethan merely grunted. He didn't believe in her God. He wasn't sure he believed in his own anymore. He turned and walked towards the well. The squeak of the pulley sounded unnaturally loud. He had let the world in, and he had a chilling premonition that the silence of Cinder Creek was now broken for good. Bringing the 5 widows and the boy into his life was like trying to gentle 5 spooked mares. As he worked the pump, they approached from the wagon, a flock of black-clad crows. Sarah made the introductions. The woman with the rifle was Eleanor Vance, widow of a deputy marshal. Her eyes, narrowed and mistrustful, never left Ethan. The youngest was Clara Mae Thompson, barely a teen, pale and frightened. Then there was Isabella Rossi, an Italian immigrant whose dark eyes held a profound sadness. And finally, Maria Gonzalez, a woman who moved like a phantom, her face hidden behind a shawl, not having spoken a word since her husband died. And the boy, Thomas, Sarah's son. His face was flushed with fever. Ethan listened to the names, but they were just sounds. He saw them for what they were, survivors. "The barn," he said, gesturing with his chin. "It's clean. Hay is fresh." Eleanor Vance bristled. "The barn, like livestock. There's a house right there." "Eleanor, please," Sarah said, placing a hand on her arm. "The man is offering us shelter." She looked at Ethan. "The barn will be fine. Thank you." The house was his sanctuary, full of his ghosts. The idea of strangers sleeping under its roof was unbearable. The barn was a compromise. For the rest of the afternoon, a tense ballet unfolded. Ethan provided water, venison jerky, and cornmeal, then retreated to the far side of his property, putting distance between himself and the intrusion. From a ridge he watched them. Sarah organized. Isabella searched the creek bed for something, her brow furrowed. Eleanor took up a sentry position, her rifle across her lap, her suspicious gaze sweeping the landscape and always returning to him. Eleanor's prejudice was a palpable thing. To her, Ethan was no different from the renegades her husband had hunted. "I don't like this, Sarah," she muttered. "Living on an Indian's charity. We don't know what he wants." "He wants to be left alone," Sarah retorted, her patience fraying. "And right now, he's giving us what we need to survive. Is your pride worth more than Thomas's life?" That silenced Eleanor for a time. As evening bled across the sky, Isabella returned from the creek. She clutched a handful of willow bark and some broad-leafed plants. She found Ethan by the corral. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her Italian accent soft. "My boy, Thomas, his fever is high." She held up the bark. "In my country, we use plants to break the fever. This willow, I have heard it is strong medicine. Is this true?" Ethan looked at the bark. His people had used it for generations. He looked at Isabella's face, at the genuine knowledge in her eyes. It was the first time one of them had spoken to him about something other than their own needs. They had spoken of the land. "Yes," he said, the single word carrying weight. "It is strong medicine. Boil it. Give the boy a little to drink." He paused, then pointed to a small, dusty green plant growing near the fence. "Crush these, make a paste, put it on his forehead. It will draw the heat." Isabella's eyes widened. "Grazie. Thank you." The exchange did not go unnoticed. From her post, Eleanor saw it, her suspicion twisting it into something sinister. A witch doctor giving strange herbs to a sick child. Later that night, Ethan sat on his porch, the distance between him and their campfire feeling both vast and terrifyingly small. He could hear their murmured conversation, the occasional fretful cry from the boy. It was a phantom echo of the life he had once known, a torment. And it was the first human sound to grace his ranch in 20 years. The first sign of the real threat came 2 days later. Their one night had stretched into 2. The wagon was beyond repair, and the nearest town was a 40-mile walk through hell. They were trapped. Ethan was chopping wood when he saw the riders. 2 of them, approaching from the north. They weren't cowboys. They rode with a swaggering arrogance, their gear too expensive. He stopped, resting the axe, and watched. Eleanor, ever vigilant, saw them too, and raised her rifle. The men reined in their horses, their eyes sweeping over the ranch, taking in Ethan, the broken wagon, and the women. One of them, a burly man with a cruel mouth, smirked. "Well now, Jeb," he said to his partner. "Look what we have here. The old Apache's gone and got himself a harem." The man named Jeb, who had cold, dead eyes, spat a stream of tobacco juice. "Mr. Blackwood ain't gonna like this. He wants this land quiet, doesn't like complications." They stared for another minute, their insolent gaze a clear message, before turning their horses and riding off. They never spoke a word to Ethan or the women. They didn't have to. After they were gone, Sarah walked over to Ethan, her face pale. "Who were they?" Ethan looked at the dust they left behind, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. "They work for Silas Blackwood," he said, his voice flat. "He owns the big ranch to the north. He wants all the water in this valley. That means he wants Cinder Creek. That means he wants this land." Eleanor lowered her rifle, a new kind of fear on her face. She had been so focused on the threat from Ethan, she had failed to see the real danger. "And what does that mean for us?" Sarah asked. Ethan picked up his axe and slammed it into the chopping block. He looked at the 5 widows, their faces a mixture of fear and uncertainty. Their presence had made his ranch a complication, a target. "It means," he said grimly, "that you brought more trouble than just a broken wheel." Silas Blackwood did not wait long. A week later, he arrived himself. He rode a magnificent black stallion, dressed in a tailored suit that was absurd in the dusty landscape. He was a man in his 50s, with a politician's smile and the eyes of a predator, flanked by the same 2 men, Jeb Stone and his partner. Ethan was mending a fence. The women, washing clothes by the creek, froze. "Good morning," Blackwood boomed, dismounting. "Silas Blackwood, your neighbor." He extended a gloved hand. Ethan ignored it. Blackwood's smile didn't falter. "I see you have visitors." His gaze swept over the women with an oily appraisal that made Sarah's skin crawl. A charitable act, a truly Christian thing to do. The way he said Christian was a subtle dig. "They needed water," Ethan said. "Ah, the water," Blackwood said. "Yes, Cinder Creek, the lifeblood of this valley, which is why I'm here." His smile vanished. "I'll be direct. I want this land. I'm prepared to offer you $500. More than this dusty patch is worth. You could take the money, move to a reservation, be more comfortable." $500 was a fortune. But this land was where Ethan had buried his past. It was where he had honored his wife's final wish. "The land is not for sale," Ethan stated. Blackwood's eyes hardened. "Everything is for sale, my friend. Perhaps you don't understand your position. You're one man, an old Indian on a plot of land the government forgot it gave away. I have resources. I have the law in my pocket." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "And now you have these women. Complications, They make you vulnerable. Accidents can happen. A stray spark to a dry barn, cattle that wander off, a well that suddenly goes foul. The threat was unmistakable. It was directed at Ethan, but it encompassed all of them. Ethan's jaw tightened. A flicker of the old warrior sparked in his eyes. "You have my answer," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Leave my land." Blackwood's friendly mask was gone completely. "A pity," he said, remounting his horse. "I tried to be reasonable. You have 1 week to reconsider. After that, the offer is withdrawn, and I can't be responsible for what might happen." He rode away, leaving an atmosphere of dread. They were no longer just stranded. They were under siege. That evening, for the first time, all 6 of them sat together. Ethan didn't join their circle, but sat on a nearby rock, a silent, brooding presence. "What are we going to do?" Clara May whispered. "He'll drive us out, or worse." "We can't stay here," Eleanor insisted, her mistrust now wholly transferred to Blackwood. "We're putting this man in danger." "And go where?" Sarah countered. "Walk to Jericho Fork with a sick child. We die in the desert. Blackwood knows that. He's trapped us here." Isabella looked over at Ethan. "This is your home," she said softly. "He is trying to steal your home." Ethan looked at the women, and at Thomas, who was finally sleeping peacefully, his fever broken by Isabella's tea. He saw their fear, but he also saw defiance. They were like him, pushed to the edge with nowhere left to run. Blackwood thought they were a weakness. But maybe, just maybe, they were something else. He finally spoke, his voice cutting through the crackle of the fire. "He thinks I am one old man. He thinks you are 5 helpless women. The desert teaches you to see things as they are. A single coyote is a scavenger. A pack is a hunter." He stood up, his tall frame silhouetted against the flames. "This land was paid for with the blood and ghosts of my people. I will not give it to a man like him." He looked directly at Sarah. "You asked for shelter. As long as you are here, you are under the protection of this house. If you run, you will die. If you stay, you must fight." A profound silence fell. He wasn't just offering them shelter anymore. He was offering an alliance. Sarah O'Malley looked at the faces of her companions. Eleanor's resolve, Isabella's quiet strength, Clara May's terror, warring with a tiny spark of hope, and even Maria, watching Ethan with an unreadable intensity. She looked at her sleeping son, the reason for all of this. She stood and faced Ethan. "We are not warriors," she said, her voice clear and strong. "We are widows. We are mothers. But we will not run. We will stay. Tell us how to fight." In that moment, under a blanket of stars, an impossible pact was sealed. The solitary Apache and the 5 desperate widows were no longer separate. They were a pack, and they were about to show Silas Blackwood what it meant to hunt on their own territory. The week that followed transformed the ranch. The lethargy of despair was replaced by the thrum of purposeful activity. Ethan, shaking off the rust of 20 years, became a reluctant teacher. And the widows, driven by the need to protect their new sanctuary, became his unlikely students. The lessons began at dawn. He started with Eleanor. "You shoot like a soldier," he told her, leading her to a series of rock formations. "A soldier stands in a line. The land is not a line. It has teeth. It hides. You must hide with it." He taught her to read the wind, to use the shadows, to track the nearly invisible signs of a coyote's passing. Eleanor, the lawman's widow, absorbed it all with a grim intensity, her former prejudice burning away like a morning mist. For Sarah, the lessons were in strategy. Ethan walked the perimeter with her, showing her the weak points, the choke points, the hidden game trails. "Blackwood thinks in terms of men and guns," he explained. "He will come from the road. He will not expect an attack from the rocks above or a trap in the wash below. Sarah became their quartermaster. Isabella, with her knowledge of plants, became Ethan's apprentice in the deeper arts of the desert. He showed her not just herbs for healing, but those for other purposes. The yucca root that could be pulped into a sleep-inducing poison for small game traps. The pungent creosote bush whose smoke could be used for signals. A bond of quiet respect formed between the Apache warrior and the Italian healer. Even timid Clara May found her role. Terrified of firearms, she had a keen eye and a steady hand. Ethan gave her the task of Fletcher, showing her how to straighten arrow shafts, knap obsidian into sharp points, and bind hawk feathers for guidance. She meticulously crafted a small supply of silent, deadly arrows for a bow Ethan had kept wrapped in buckskin for 2 decades. The most profound change, however, was in Maria Gonzalez. The silent widow started to watch. Her haunted eyes followed Ethan everywhere. She saw in his solitude a reflection of her own profound grief. One afternoon, Ethan was checking his snares. He came to one and found it empty. He knelt, studying the ground, and saw the faint tracks of a bobcat. When he rose, Maria was standing just a few feet away, having approached without a sound. She pointed a trembling finger at the tracks. "Gato," she whispered. "Cat." It was the first word she had spoken in weeks. Ethan looked from the tracks to her face and saw a flicker of life in her eyes. He simply nodded. From that day on, she began to shadow him on his patrols, never speaking, but watching, learning. Her silence, once a symptom of trauma, was becoming a skill. She was becoming their eyes. But it was a near tragedy that truly cemented their bond. Thomas, now recovered from his fever, wandered from the barn, chasing a lizard toward the creek. He reached under a rocky overhang just as a large diamondback coiled in the shade struck out. The boy's scream ripped through the air. Everyone converged on the spot. Thomas clutched his hand, 2 small puncture wounds already swelling. While Sarah descended into hysterics, Ethan and Isabella sprang into action. "Hold him still," Ethan commanded, his voice a sharp crack of authority. Isabella was already on her knees, cradling the sobbing boy, speaking to him in soothing Italian. Ethan pulled his knife and made 2 small, shallow cuts over the bite marks. He then put his mouth to the wound and began to suck, spitting the blood and venom onto the dirt. It was an old, dangerous technique, but it was all they had. "Clara, the fire! A piece of metal in the flames now!" he barked. "Eleanor, rope from the barn, tie it above his elbow, not too tight." His commands galvanized them. Each woman moved to her task. After drawing what venom he could, Ethan cauterized the wound with the glowing hot tip of a metal file. Thomas screamed once more before fainting. "He is not dead," Ethan said, breathing heavily. "Now the work begins." For the next 2 days, the ranch house, Ethan's sacred space, became a hospital. He had carried the boy inside without a second thought, laying him on his own cot. The barrier between his world and theirs had dissolved. He and Isabella worked side by side, preparing poultices and brewing teas. The other women took turns sitting with him, bathing his forehead. On the 3rd morning, Thomas's eyes fluttered open. "Mama," he croaked. The crisis had passed. Later that day, Eleanor Vance found Ethan sitting on his porch. "You saved him," she said. Ethan didn't look at her. "We saved him." "My husband," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion, "spent years fighting men like you. He called your people savages. He was a good man, but he was wrong. I was wrong." Ethan finally turned his head. He saw the sincere regret in her eyes, a bridge being built over a chasm of hatred. He gave a slow, solemn nod. "Many good men were wrong," he said. The shared danger had changed them. They were no longer a man and 5 widows, They were a family, and as they watched the sun set, they knew that Silas Blackwood wasn't just coming for a piece of land anymore. He was coming for their home. The 1-week deadline passed into a tense, watchful silence. The storm broke not with a thunderclap, but with the quiet theft of their future. Ethan rode out one morning to find his fence cut and his entire herd of 30 longhorns gone, driven north towards the Rocking Bee. Blackwood was trying to starve them out without firing a shot. But this was a new game now. That evening, Ethan spread a map Sarah had drawn on a piece of hide. "He thinks like a white man," Ethan said. "He understands fences and ownership. He does not understand the land." Their response would not be a direct assault, but a strike from the shadows, using the desert itself as their weapon. Their target was Blackwood's weekly supply wagon, his lifeline of whiskey, flour, and ammunition. 2 nights later, Ethan, Eleanor, and Sarah moved under a new moon, following game trails to a narrow canyon miles away. They worked for hours, positioning a series of boulders on a ledge above the trail, held by a single, cleverly rigged rope, a deadfall trap on a massive scale. As dawn streaked the sky, they heard the rumble of the wagon. Concealed in the rocks, they waited. When the wagon entered the bottleneck, a signal, the call of a cactus wren from Maria, their lookout, echoed in the canyon. "Now," Ethan whispered. He and Sarah pulled. A cascade of rock and dirt thundered down, blocking the path. From her perch, Eleanor fired twice, shattering the wagon's front axle. The heavy vehicle collapsed, spilling its contents. The 2 drivers, panicked and confused, fired blindly into the cliffs as the attackers melted back into the landscape. They had sent their message. "We are not helpless prey." Blackwood's reply was swift and vicious. He sent his cruel foreman Jeb Stone with 4 men, not to fight, but to destroy. Their target was the well, the heart of the ranch. But Maria, their silent sentinel, spotted them miles out and raced back. "5 riders," she gasped, "from the north, fast." "To the house," Ethan commanded. "Bring the water in." They scrambled, hauling barrels into the thick-walled adobe home. Eleanor took an upstairs window, Ethan the other. Jeb Stone's men thundered into the yard. "Blackwood gave you a chance, Apache," Jeb bellowed. 2 of his men ran for the well with large sacks. "Now you'll die of thirst." "The sacks," Ethan said calmly to Eleanor, "not the men." 2 rifles cracked as one. Both sacks were torn open, spilling a foul white powder harmlessly into the dirt. Enraged, Stone's men opened fire, their bullets thudding against the adobe walls. The standoff was a tense exchange of fire when a rider broke from cover, trying for a better angle. From the hayloft window, a silent arrow arced through the air, striking the man's horse in the flank. The animal shrieked and bucked, throwing its rider. Clara May, her face pale but her eyes blazing, had joined the fight. The silent, unseen attack unnerved them. Realizing his mission had failed, Jeb Stone gave the order to pull back. "We'll be back," he screamed. "We'll burn you out." They galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and a promise of escalating violence. But something was wrong. After the riders left, Ethan went to the well. The white powder was mostly in the dirt, but some had gotten into the water. He scooped a handful of wet earth, sniffing it. It was lime, enough to spoil the water, but not poison it. That wasn't Blackwood's style. He was a man of total annihilation. This felt sloppy. A warning, not an attack. And then Ethan noticed something else. A small, carved piece of wood lying near the well pump. A child's toy. A small wooden bird, crudely whittled. It wasn't Thomas's. He had never seen it before. He picked it up. He recognized the carving style. It was from a tribe far to the south, a tribe he hadn't seen in over 20 years. The toy wasn't a message from Blackwood. It was a message for him, and it meant the ghosts of his past were no longer content to whisper on the wind. They were walking his land. The air after Jeb Stone's threat was heavy, still. They knew Blackwood would return, not to intimidate, but to annihilate. Ethan turned the ranch into a fortress, but his mind was elsewhere, troubled by the small wooden bird. He didn't tell the others. It was his burden to carry. For now. The attack came at dawn on the fourth day. Maria slipped into the barn. "They come," she whispered urgently. "Many men, 10, maybe 12, from the north and from the west canyon." Blackwood was flanking them. "To your places," Ethan's voice was a steady anchor. "Do not fire until they are in the yard." In the gray morning light, they moved. Sarah took Thomas to the root cellar with Isabella. Clara May climbed to the hayloft with her bow. Eleanor and Ethan manned the upstairs windows. Maria, her scouting done, armed herself with a heavy skillet and a knife, melting into the barn's deepest shadows. The drumming of hooves grew louder. 8 men, led by Blackwood and Jeb Stone, rode brazenly into the yard. 4 others circled west towards the barn. "Ethan," Blackwood bellowed, "your time is up. Send out the women." The only answer was silence. "Fine," he snarled. "Burn it." As 2 men with torches advanced, Ethan's voice cut the air. "Now!" The yard erupted. Ethan's Winchester dropped one torchbearer. Eleanor's Spencer took the other. Blackwood's men scrambled for cover as a storm of well-aimed fire rained down. From the hayloft, Clara's arrows flew, silent and deadly, sowing confusion. But the flanking group had reached the barn. They kicked the doors in, expecting to find cowering women. The first man through was met with the sickening crunch of Maria's cast-iron skillet against his skull. The second stared in shock as Maria stood before him, knife in hand. But he never saw Jeb Stone step up behind her. A single shot echoed inside the barn. Maria stumbled out into the yard, a bloody gash on her arm, with Stone grinning behind her. "Got one of them, boss," he yelled. But in his moment of triumph, he forgot the shadows. From the side door of the barn, Sarah O'Malley appeared, having circled around. "For my husband!" she screamed, firing her pistol. The bullet struck Jeb Stone in the back, and he pitched forward into the dirt. The foreman's death broke the attackers' morale. 2 more men fled. Blackwood, now with only 2 men, was trapped and enraged. "I'll kill you all," he shrieked. Ethan had been waiting. "Eleanor, keep them pinned," he ordered, and slipped away from the window. Moving with the silence of a ghost, he used the trenches they dug to circle behind the battle. He rose from the earth like an avenging spirit, right behind Blackwood's position. He disabled 1 man with the butt of his rifle. The last surrendered when a bullet from Eleanor's window kicked his pistol from his hand. Now only 2 men remained. Ethan and Silas Blackwood. Blackwood stared, his civilized veneer stripped away. He raised his revolver, but Ethan was faster. He didn't shoot. He lunged, twisting the gun from Blackwood's hand. They grappled in the dirt, a desperate struggle. Ethan finally overpowered the larger man, pinning him with a knife to his throat. "This land is not yours," Ethan whispered, the desire for vengeance a hot fire in his blood. But then the women emerged from their positions, their faces smudged with gunpowder, their eyes shining with fierce triumph. He looked from the terrified man beneath him to the faces of his new family. They had won, together. The warrior's fire in his soul cooled. He had a choice: feed the ghosts of his past or build a future. Slowly he pulled the knife away. The siege of Cinder Creek was over. As the sun rose on a yard scarred by battle, a new, more chilling threat emerged. From the south, a single rider approached. Not a cowboy, not a soldier. He was Apache. Dressed in the old way, his face painted for war. He stopped his horse 100 yards away and watched them, his expression unreadable. Ethan stood, his blood running cold. He knew the man. His name was Cale. They had been brothers once, in Geronimo's band. But Cale had followed a darker path, one of vengeance and blood. He was the leader of a renegade band that had terrorized the border for years. The small wooden bird. It had been Kyle's sign, a message. "I know you're here." Kyle raised a hand, not in greeting, but to point. He pointed at the bound Silas Blackwood. Then he pointed at the ranch house. Then he pointed at Ethan. He held his gaze for a long moment, then turned his horse and rode away, vanishing as silently as he had appeared. The message was brutally clear. This wasn't over. It had just begun. Blackwood was just a pawn. Cale was the real player. And he wanted something on this ranch. The victory over Blackwood felt hollow now, replaced by a much deeper dread. They had fought off a greedy rancher. How could they possibly stand against a ghost from Ethan's past, a warrior as skilled and ruthless as he was? Eleanor looked at Ethan, her face grim. Who was that? Ethan's face was a mask of stone. "An old friend," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "And our new enemy." The fragile peace was shattered. Now they had two enemies: the white man's law, which would surely come looking for Blackwood, and the Apache's law, which had just found Ethan. The deputy in Jericho Fork, John Riley, was a friend of Eleanor's late husband. An honest man. It was their only hope. Eleanor would escort Blackwood and his surviving men to town and bring back the law before Cale could return. "You should have killed him," Eleanor said quietly before she left, gazing at the defeated Blackwood. "It would have been justice." "Vengeance is a fire that burns the one who holds it," Ethan replied. "My life has had enough fire. Today is for building." Eleanor looked at him, a deep and final understanding passing between them. Then she rode east, leaving the ranch in a state of watchful, terrified peace. The week that followed was one of healing and frantic preparation. They repaired the bullet-scarred walls, but every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Ethan tried to explain Cale. "We fought together," he told them around a low fire. "But when we surrendered, something in him broke. He believes our people can only survive by taking back what was stolen, with blood. He sees me as a traitor for accepting this land from the government." "But what does he want?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "But that toy, it was a sign from the spirit world for his tribe. He left it at the well. He believes there is something sacred here, something he's willing to kill for." Their work was interrupted by a horrifying discovery. Isabella, gathering herbs by the creek, found several of their remaining cattle dead, lying by the water's edge, their bodies bloated. There were no marks on them. "Poison," Ethan said, examining the water. "Not the lime from before. Something else. Something that left no taste, no smell." Cale was testing their defenses, probing their weaknesses. He had poisoned the lifeblood of the ranch. The creek was now a thread of death. Their well was their only source of safe water, and it was a finite one. The psychological toll was immense. Clara May started seeing figures in the rocks. Maria reverted to her silence, her eyes constantly scanning the ridges. The unity forged in battle began to fray under the strain of an invisible enemy. The true twist came when Eleanor returned. She was not alone. Deputy Riley was with her, along with a U.S. Marshal. But they weren't there to congratulate them. Their faces were grim. "Ethan, known as Nate," the Marshal said, his hand on his pistol. "I have a warrant for your arrest." "Arrest? For what?" Sarah demanded. "He defended his home." "Silas Blackwood has powerful friends," Deputy Riley explained, his eyes full of apology. "He's telling a different story. He says he was attacked without provocation. that you're a renegade leading a band of outlaws." But the marshal's next words were the ones that stopped Ethan's heart. "The warrant is for an older crime, from 20 years ago, the murder of a federal agent near the San Carlos reservation. An agent whose partner swore his killer was a Chiricahua warrior who vanished shortly after. A warrior named Ethan." Eleanor stared in shock. "That's a lie." Ethan said nothing, because it wasn't a lie, not entirely. He hadn't killed the agent, but he had been there. It was Cale who had fired the shot that started a bloody skirmish. Ethan had fled, assuming Cale was dead, and had lived under a false name ever since. Cale's reappearance wasn't just a threat, it was a perfectly laid trap. He had likely sent a message to the law, a whisper in the right ear, to bring the full weight of the U.S. government down on this ranch. He was using the white man's law to do his dirty work. Now they were surrounded by Blackwood's lies, by the U.S. Marshals, and by Cale's warriors, who were undoubtedly watching from the mesas, waiting for the moment to strike. The Marshal gave him a choice. "You can come with us peacefully, or we can take this ranch apart, piece by piece." For Ethan, there was no choice. To fight the Marshals would be suicide and would condemn the women. To surrender meant hanging for a crime he didn't commit. He looked at Sarah, at her son Thomas, at the family he had just found. "I will go," he said. But as the Marshals put him in irons, Isabella Rossi stepped forward. "You are making a mistake," she said, her voice shaking but clear. She held up a small, leather-bound book. It was her husband's journal, written in Italian. "My husband, Marco. He was the engineer at the mine in Clifton. He wrote everything down." She opened it and pointed to a passage, translating through her tears. "He knew the mine was unsafe. He warned the company. He warned Mr. Blackwood, who was a silent partner in the operation. Blackwood wanted to cut costs. My husband wrote that Blackwood himself ordered them to use faulty timber supports. He didn't just cause the collapse. He murdered our husbands." The revelation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Blackwood hadn't just been a greedy rancher. He was a mass murderer. The Marshal looked from Isabella to the bound Blackwood, who had gone pale. Suddenly, this was more than just a dispute over land. It was a federal crime of a different magnitude. And just then, from the high rocks, a single sharp whistle echoed across the valley. Cale's signal. He had seen the lawman, seen Ethan in chains. He thought his trap had worked. It was his time to move. The Marshal looked up at the rocks, then back at his prisoner. He was caught in the middle of a war he didn't understand. "What is going on here?" he demanded. Ethan met the Marshal's eyes. "You want the man who killed your agent 20 years ago? He's up there," he said, nodding towards the mesas. "And he's coming for all of us." The Marshal, a pragmatic man named Hayes, was no fool. He saw the truth in Isabella's grief and the cold calculation in Blackwood's terror. He looked at the journal, then at the ridges where unseen eyes were watching. He was a lawman caught between a murderer, a renegade warband, and a man he had come to arrest who was now his only key to survival. "Uncuff him," Hayes ordered his deputy. "But if this is a trick, I'll put you down myself." The ranch became an armed camp, an impossible alliance of lawmen, widows, and an Apache warrior against a common foe. Hayes had 2 men, plus Riley. With Ethan and the women, they were a small but determined force. Ethan, now free, took command. His knowledge of the land was their only advantage. "Kyle will not attack directly," he explained, sketching a map in the dirt. "He will use the terrain. He will try to separate us, pick us off one by one." The plan was desperate. They would use the house as a fortress, but set a trap outside. A lure. And the lure would be Silas Blackwood. They tied Blackwood to the porch railing, in plain sight. It was a brutal piece of bait, but necessary. Kale wanted whatever was on this land. Blackwood was the man who had tried to take it. Kale might want to know what Blackwood knew. As dusk fell, a chilling silence descended. Then it began, not with a charge, but with a ghosting presence. An arrow thudded into the adobe wall near the marshal's head. A second later, from a different direction, a rifle shot kicked up dirt by the well. Kale was toying with them, testing their nerves, mapping their positions. Inside the house, the tension was unbearable. Clara May was shaking, but clutching her bow. Maria, her silence now a weapon, stood by a window, her eyes seeing into the darkness in a way no one else could. The first real attack came against the barn. Two of Kale's warriors tried to set it ablaze. But Ethan had anticipated this. He and Sarah had dug a shallow trench from the house to the barn. As the warriors crept forward with torches, Eleanor and Deputy Riley opened fire from the house, pinning them down. From the trench, Ethan rose up behind them. The fight was swift, brutal, and silent. Two threats neutralized. But it was a diversion. While all eyes were on the barn, Kale himself, moving with supernatural speed, slipped onto the porch. He held a knife to Blackwood's throat. "The warrior who hides behind women and white men," Kale hissed in their native tongue, loud enough for Ethan to hear. "Tell me what the white-eyed devil knows. Why is this land so important to him?" Before Blackwood could answer, Ethan stepped out of the front door, his Winchester leveled. "This is between us, Kale." "It was always between us," Kale snarled. "You chose their world over ours. You live on land given to you by our jailers." "I live on land my wife is buried near," Ethan said, his voice low and pained. "I live to honor a promise." "Honor?" Kale laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "There is no honor in survival, only in victory. This land holds the spirit of the Thunderbird. It is a sacred place, a place of power. It should belong to the people, not to a ghost like you." Suddenly it all made sense. The well, the toy bird. This wasn't about water. It was a holy war. Marshal Hayes appeared at a window, his pistol aimed at Kale. "Let the prisoner go." Kale smirked. "You have no power here, lawman." And with a flick of his wrist, he sliced Blackwood's throat. The rancher slumped, gurgling his last breath. Kyle used the moment of shock to vanish back into the darkness. The bait was gone. The battle was now purely for survival. The night exploded into chaos. Kyle's warriors attacked from all sides. Gunfire flashed in the dark. Arrows rained down from the rocks. One of the marshal's men fell, an arrow in his chest. Isabella and Sarah worked frantically, tending to the wounded deputy while firing pistols from the lower windows. In the hayloft, Clara May, finding a courage she never knew she possessed, loosed arrow after arrow, her shots driving attackers from the barn roof. The final confrontation came down to Ethan and Kale. It was a primal dance in the moonlit yard, knife against knife, brother against brother. They were two sides of the same coin, forged in the same fire, but tempered into different weapons. Kale was faster, fueled by 20 years of rage. But Ethan was smarter, fighting not for a past he couldn't reclaim, but for a future he refused to lose. He used Kale's anger against him, drawing him into a trap near the corral. A rope laid out in the dust that Clara May had tied to a heavy gate. At Ethan's signal, Maria, hidden in the shadows, kicked the post free. The heavy gate swung around, catching Kale and pinning him against the corral fence. He was trapped. Ethan stood over him, his knife at Kale's throat, the scene a mirror of his earlier standoff with Blackwood. "End it, brother," Kale spat. "Send me to the spirits." Ethan looked at the man who had been his friend, his face a mask of sorrow. He looked back at the house where the firing had stopped. He saw the faces in the windows, watching. his family. He lowered the knife. "Your war is over," he said. The rising sun illuminated a yard scarred by battle, but filled with a profound, victorious quiet. Kyle and his surviving warriors were taken prisoner by Marshal Hayes. The cost had been high. One lawman was dead, Deputy Riley was wounded, and the ranch bore new scars. Marshal Hayes stood before Ethan, the arrest warrant forgotten. "It seems I came here for one criminal and found a half-dozen others," he said. "That journal, and your testimony, it will be enough to clear your name of that old charge. Cale will confirm what happened. As for Blackwood, it seems justice found him one way or another." The law had, for once, bent towards the truth. A week later, the ranch was quiet again. The graves were filled, the walls were patched. The trauma remained, but it was overshadowed by their incredible victory. That evening, the survivors gathered on the porch. The air was cool and clean. Sarah O'Malley, speaking for them all, turned to Ethan. "We owe you everything," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But we can't live on your charity. We've saved a little. We want to buy a piece of this land from you, to build our own cabins, to be your neighbors." Ethan looked at the 5 women, at the boy playing nearby. He looked at the life that now filled the spaces once occupied by ghosts. This was no longer just his sanctuary, it was their home. A rare, small smile touched his lips as he slowly shook his head. "This land is not for sale," he said. Seeing their crestfallen faces, he waited a beat before delivering the final truth. "You do not buy land from family." He gestured with an open hand to the house, the creek, the valley beyond. "Our home is large enough." Tears of gratitude welled in Sarah's eyes. A profound, unbreakable bond settled over them. Ethan, the solitary warrior, was no longer alone. He had lost one family to the tragedies of the past. But here, against all odds, in the middle of the Arizona desert, he had found another. A new dawn had finally come to Cinder Creek. The story of Ethan and the widows of Cinder Creek isn't just a tale of survival. It's a testament to the fact that family isn't always the one you're born into, but the one you forge in the fires of adversity. They were broken individuals from different worlds, united by loss, who found strength, courage, and a new beginning in each other. Their home was built not just with adobe and wood, but with loyalty, respect, and the fierce determination to protect what they held dear. If this story of resilience and the birth of an unlikely American family moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a powerful story from the forgotten corners of the Wild West. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. We have so many more tales of grit, courage, and the untold history of the frontier waiting to be shared. Thank you for listening.